You are listening to the Brand Architect Podcast, and this is your host, Ani Alexander.
Hey there, and welcome back to the Brand Architect Podcast. It's me, Ani Alexander, and I'm really excited today because it's a special episode. Just a few days ago, the podcast turned 3 years old. How awesome is that? So it all started from Right to Be Read, which was launched exactly 3 years ago, and it developed to Brand Architect, and we are close to almost 300 episodes already. So 3 years, 300 episodes, around 200 interviews. It's been an awesome journey, and I decided that it would be very logical and interesting if I did a special episode and shared a little bit about the backstory, about the story of how this podcast was born, about what I went through, what it took, how did I end up being where I am, and a little bit of behind the scenes stuff, because I usually don't talk about that, at least not on my podcast. I usually share a little bit of things when I'm asked on interviews, when I'm over to other people's podcasts, but I rarely share my journey on this podcast, and probably this is something that we have to address as well. That is why today I decided to go behind the scenes and tell you how it all started. So before it all started, this is what happened. It took me over a year actually to realize that I could have a podcast. Before that, I had all those self-sabotaging thoughts of why I can't do it. They were all flying in my mind. And, when I say self-sabotaging thoughts, I mean things like, who would listen to someone with accent? How can I manage an audio post-production? I have no clue how to do that. And it sounds super hard. Or who would agree to be interviewed by someone who is completely unknown, is a non-English speaker, and lives in a country they have probably never heard of and have no clue where it is? Or the other one was, well, most probably the equipment is super expensive and I will not be able to afford it anyway, and it will require a huge investment. And then one day I decided to follow my own advice that I'm giving out to everyone and just do it. Because you know what? Honestly, until I tried, I would not know if it would be possible or not. So what I did was I recorded a 2 minutes, very short thing of me speaking and sent it out to my online friends from the UK to get feedback about the voice and the accent, because that was one of those self-sabotaging thoughts, right? So the general feedback was, hey, you have to start a podcast. And I'm still not sure how objective they were, but still, that's what I got back. And I finally decided to mute all those self-sabotaging thoughts and launch. So from the day I made the decision to launch a podcast, that's when I had no clue about how things are made and how I had to approach this whole thing, until I actually launched Right to Be Read podcast 3 years ago. The whole thing took me about 3 weeks. So those were 3 weeks of learning, recording, editing, plus lengthy conversations with my now friend Meron Barakat from Podcast Incubator, whom I have interviewed on the podcast, who was kind enough to provide all the information and encouragement that I needed. And Podcast Incubator members, all of them, were a huge help, because we were all going through the same process of starting from scratch and trying to come up with an awesome podcast. So it was a really nice space where I felt safe to share my doubts, to share my challenges, and to get encouragement, emotional support, plus all the knowledge and resources that I needed. So we reached the point where Right to Be Read podcast went live. So let's talk about that part. Well, it took me too long to record the very first introductory episode. And I'm sure most probably many of you haven't even heard that one because it's way down the thing. And it's been a long time ago, as I say. But when I sat down to record that one, I recorded and re-recorded and re-recorded and erased and started over, and it took ages. I recorded the thing, I listened, I cringed, I hated the way my voice sounded, and no matter how many times I tried, I did not like what I heard at the end. So I was eventually erasing the stuff and starting over. And at some point, I realized that the process could take forever. Because I realized that I would never be happy with the result, and that since I had no experience, it could never be perfect in the near future anyway. So eventually, I closed my eyes and submitted the podcast to be approved by iTunes exactly the way it was. So I stopped at one point re-recording, I stopped listening and making sure that I'm happy, and I just shipped it the way it was. And probably if I listen to it now, I will still cringe. But as I say, first of all, I'm not sure any of you have heard that one. And I don't think it matters, because what mattered most was to make sure that it's out there and that the journey starts. So then I had recorded my first interview. And it appeared that my microphone was moving against my blouse during the recording, so I had this irritating background sound, which I could absolutely not clean up. And that was one of the first mistakes that I made. So I was preparing in advance in the beginning, thinking of questions to ask, was getting stressed, and I was very tense when I was recording. I sounded unnatural. And then I had many different fears. And my biggest fear was, what if no one would listen? And although I tried to stress out and look at it as an experiment, it was a bit hard to look at it that way, but that's how I approached that. I approached this project of launching a podcast as an experiment in order to see how it goes. And if it goes well, okay, great. If no, I'll just quit and move on to something else. So that was my attitude and approach to that, because if I took it too serious, most probably I would stress out too much and not be able to go ahead and do that. So let's talk about the first results, which were amazing, and I really loved that fact. Because of the huge time difference between Armenia and the US, when iTunes approved my podcast, I was asleep. It was in the middle of the night, most probably. And when I woke up and read the email that the podcast is already available on iTunes, I felt like, oh shit, there's no turning back. What do I do now? Oh my God. So I freaked out a little bit. And nevertheless, it was already done. So I shared it on social media. And I asked friends for initial reviews because they were very, very important. When I just self-published my very first book, just like before, I was refreshing the Amazon stats page in order to see how many books were sold. I was refreshing my podcast statistic page in order to see how many people listened to the podcast over and over and over again. So I have no clue where did the people come from eventually, but on day one, I had almost 50 people who listened to the podcast. And that was awesome. That was something I didn't expect, because 50, I mean, imagine 50 people in a room and you talking to them. That's like huge for a newbie, right? So after a few days, it got featured on iTunes New and Noteworthy overall in different categories, in different countries, and friends were sending me screenshots of the results. So everything sort of started rolling, and it felt absolutely surreal. And then the really fun part started when organic reviews from people I had no clue who they were. I didn't know. That kind of reviews started coming in. And guess what most of them said? They wrote, "I love your accent." And what I thought would be a huge turnoff eventually became part of what people liked. So that was a real big discovery for me, that it was something I absolutely did not expect. And in some reviews, even I had a Bond girl and Zaza Gabor mentioned in few reviews about the accent. So that really cracked me up. But really, it was something that I had not planned. I did not anticipate. And it was a very nice surprise because, to be honest, even if I wanted to, most probably I wouldn't be able to change my accent. That's the way I sound. So if people didn't like it and it was a turn off, then it would be a turn off. And eventually it would be the end of my podcasting path, most probably. So early on, I landed guests such as Pat Flynn, Chris Brogan, Peter Shankman, Jay Samit, James Altucher, and such. I'm very proud I had the chance to talk to them. Later on, I became friends with some of them. And you can go back and search those episodes and listen to those because they're really, really awesome. So you may not believe it now, but I actually found out how big James Altucher was only after our interview. Because after it was aired and we were already having a follow-up friendly conversations on Facebook, only then I started receiving different messages from people saying, oh my God, how did you land James Altucher on your show? So that is when I realized that it was really, really huge. Okay, so now let's talk about the magic of podcasting. So remember my doubts and fears before the launch and what I really thought about that might happen, all those, bad case scenarios. Well, they all proved to be wrong. I felt really humble for the chance to talk to so many amazing people, and so many inspiring conversations were taking place, so many new connections and friends as a result, and it was an awesome journey. That is why I always recommend people who are thinking whether they should launch a podcast or not to actually go ahead and do it, because even if they don't make money with podcasting, even if it does not grow their back-end business, or it doesn't really become a very famous big podcast, you will still gain a lot out of it. And apart from the fact that you will have loads of fun, you will also get awesome connections. So the most important people I did it for were my listeners. And you guys are amazing. You are loyal, encouraging, and you provide your time and attention. And I absolutely, truly appreciate every single one of you. And I want to use this episode to thank you, every single one of you personally, for the time and attention, because it's very precious these days. We have a noisy world. We have so many podcasts. And the fact that you chose mine to listen to, it really makes me humble. And I truly appreciate that. So imagine how privileged one is to be able to whisper in almost 10,000 pairs of ears every single week. And that's what I'm doing. It still feels surreal. 3 years have passed, but believe me, it still feels surreal to me. And honestly, I don't even know why you guys listen to me, because 3 years already have passed, and I'm thinking like maybe I'm becoming redundant, maybe things are becoming boring. I don't know, but you stick around, and it's awesome. I can't explain it, but I truly love that fact. And I also appreciate the fact that some of my most loyal listeners eventually reached out to me, and we became real friends later on as a result, which is really, really awesome. So it's been a wonderful journey, which opened so many new opportunities. And just by plugging my microphone into a laptop and doing what I love, which is talking to people, brought me to a stage where I was no longer an unknown person from a faraway country. That's where I am now. It took 3 years, and I want to talk to you about the how and about the fact that many people think that things just happen. Many people talk about this impression of overnight success. And I just want to give you the real picture. I don't want you to think that things just happen, things just fall into your lap, and to expect these immediate results. So I really hate when many people online promote this idea of overnight success. They somehow leave the impression that things were easy and fast, so they can show you how you can do the same in exchange for money. So they're, selling their stuff, saying, okay, I was in your shoes, but I managed to do this. I'll show you how. Just give me your money and I'll show you how, and you'll learn it and you'll do the same and you'll become as successful as I am. Yes, I did what I loved. And yes, it was lots of fun, but it was also a hard work too. And getting those names required a different approach for each of them, getting these big people on the show, something I had to figure out by myself. Because, if someone tells you there is a magic formula, a ready template you can use, a service you can hire in order to get famous people, amazingly well-known and really exciting, inspiring people over to your show, please do me a favor and laugh at their faces, right? Please don't believe them, because it doesn't exist. For each person, I had a completely different stories about how I got them on the show, and it all took a completely different approach, and there was no one simple template that I used for everyone. And then when people I wanted to interview said yes, there was this huge time difference between me and them in terms of time zones. So I was sometimes recording at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. So I hope you wouldn't guess, and I hope my voice wasn't too sleepy back then, but that's what was happening. And there were days when I had 5 back-to-back 1-hour interviews a day. And there were days when I had loads of things I had to say no to, many places I couldn't go, many people I couldn't see, many things I had to give up just because I had to deliver and just because I had an interview to record. So I don't complain. I don't at all. It was my choice. I would do it over and over again. But I just want you to see the real picture, and not only the nice photos of podcasters, rocking their microphones, these nice photos of, you and the microphone and the earphones and, all that stuff. And I know I'm guilty of that too, because I love those, but it's not only that. So there is loads of things happening behind the scenes. There is loads of work. There's loads of time and effort put into it. So be prepared for that. If you are thinking about launching a podcast, know that this is going to happen if you want to get tangible results. So let's talk about the secrets of how, because many people want to know, how did you end up with such an amazing guest? How do you manage to ask the right questions? How do you edit your podcast episodes? And I presume many ask those questions because they think that if I give them the answer and they go and do the same thing the same way, they will get the same results that I've got. And the problem is, nope, that's not how it works. For one thing, I started 3 years ago and many things have changed after that. So many things are different now. And the other thing is, probably, if you do things the way I'm doing them now, you will end up with results which would be much worse if you had figured things out yourself. And let me tell you why. I don't advise copying what I'm doing now, is because I probably do things differently a little bit, and probably this is not the best approach. It is the best one for me for now, but it may not be the best approach for newbies, for those who are just starting out. So, for example, I'll just tell you how I'm doing things, and you'll realize why I'm telling all this to you. So the first thing is, apart from my $60 microphone, I don't have anything else in terms of equipment. I just plug that microphone into my laptop and roll. That's all the equipment I've purchased. That's all I'm using. And that's all that I think is enough for my podcast at this stage. Second thing is I don't edit my podcast episodes. So apart from the sound quality that I'm trying to keep good, and I'm trying to make sure that there are no annoying background noises and your listening experience is good enough, I don't go ahead and, cut out parts of the conversations. I don't cut out ums and ums and knows, which I know that I'm using too much. I just keep it as natural as it is, as raw as it is, because I want it to feel that way. The third thing is I never prepare in advance. So I don't have a ready script. I don't talk beforehand with the interviewees to prepare them. I don't know what's coming next. I don't do a lengthy research apart from the fact that I want to know who the person is and how I can which angle I will approach that person in order to be relevant and the content should be interesting. So I don't do anything in advance. We just, connect with each other and we free flow and we have natural human conversations. And I pick up the, follow-up questions based on what I'm hearing from my interviewee. And that's the key for me. I want to have a normal human conversations. And it means that we free flow. It means that we just talk as if, the way we would talk if we just met in real life. And I don't even try to sound professional because that's for the radio stations. I am not a professional, so I don't pretend to be. And I'm just someone who plugs in a mic at home and talks to people, the people I like, the people on topics that I think are interesting, and I don't need to pretend to be a pro. So I guess, that's all I wanted to share with you. A little bit of behind the scenes, a little bit of glimpse and back look at the journey. And probably it gives a bit about who I am, where I come from. And probably that would bring a little bit more insight about the way things are now, about where it all started. And it definitely has been a 3 year of roller coaster ride. And, don't get me wrong, I love roller coasters. And today was the day when I decided to go back and reflect. So I hope this wasn't too long. I hope it was interesting. And feel free, if you are really thinking about launching a podcast, feel free to reach out to me. I do have a free resource about that, so you can go ahead and check it out at anialexander.com/challenge. There you have all the resources, downloadable PDFs, videos, tutorials, where I show you the basics of what you need to know in order to launch your podcast in about a week. So you can check that out if you need to. Meanwhile, once again, thank you very much for being around. Thank you for listening to this show. Thank you for your time and attention. I truly, truly appreciate every single one of you. Take care.